Now more with Frank Gaffney.
Welcome back. We're joined by Douglas Murray, one of the most splendid men I know, particularly in Europe, especially a man who has done incalculably important work in illuminating the dangers facing the free world, and most especially the rising tide of Sharia supremacism. He is these days the associate director of an organization near and dear to my heart, named after my old boss, the Henry Jackson Society. He is also an associate editor for a splendid publication, The Spectator, and the founder in the past of a wonderful organization, the Center for Social Cohesion. He is the author of 5 books, including most recently Islamophilia, a very metropolitan malady. Douglas Murray, welcome back. Good to have you with us.
Very good to be back with you, Frank.
Well, you've been writing a lot, and very importantly, on these various issues, Douglas, including most recently, I think just this morning, a piece in which you were describing some of the challenges that we are facing from these Sharia supremacists, and how it looks from your perspective, and what the rancor is towards President Trump as he sounds a cautionary note about the implications of such things in this country as well. Would you develop those themes for us?
Yes, the spur for my recent article was the comments that President Trump made about Sweden and the reaction to them, which I think are enormously telling. It's reminiscent of something that happened 2 years ago now, when after the terrorist attacks on the offices of Charlie Hebdo and also then at a Jewish supermarket in Paris, the mayor of Paris said that she was going to sue Fox News. And this was because Fox had a contributor who mentioned the no-go zone, which the Fox News contributor in question said exists in France and in other countries in Europe. And on the basis of this, the mayor of Paris suggested that such comments could lead to things like a downturn in tourism in Paris. They defamed the city and so on. Of course, if the mayor of Paris had really worried about the impression that Paris was giving to the world, then the dead Jews and the dead cartoonists would ordinarily be the thing that you would focus on. But no, it was this focus suddenly on Fox News and on a single Fox News contributor. The same diversion, deflection, distraction, I would argue, has happened in the reaction from Sweden and from Europe in general about Donald Trump's comments. In response to a comment by the president, everybody immediately switched into hilarity mode. Don't you know, Sweden's just the land of meatballs and self-assembling furniture. And it's a very unhealthy thing, I would argue, in Europe, that we're in this mode where the person who points to a problem becomes the subject of the ire. And we don't seem to get any closer to addressing the actual problem. Instead, we have this strange, I think, slightly psychiatric response.
Yeah. Douglas, you have been subjected to a fair amount of this yourself, needless to say, as one of the most forthright critics of this kind of conduct by people who are seeking to impose, among other things, Sharia blasphemy laws on Europe and elsewhere in the West. I wonder, as you're speaking to an American audience at the moment, what of the things that are manifesting themselves in Britain should be top of mind for us as we're contemplating the state of our union, yes, but also the sort of state of the free world?
Well, this may seem too general a point, but I think it's important, is that I just urge people to consider the truth of things that even their political opponents say. There's an extraordinary thing that has happened in Britain in recent years. It's happened in Europe in recent years, whereby because you don't like the person or didn't vote for the person who's saying something, all of your energy goes to lambasting their claims. And instead, I said this to a Swedish MP on the BBC, it really is just so much easier in the long term if instead of ridiculing, you try to address the substance of the claims and the problems that people identify. This is such a broad thing that it's almost useless, but I think it is vital. It's vital when people point to real problems that exist. Instead of fighting the shallow political war on it, people consider the veracity of the truth of what is being identified and try to respond to it. I said to this Swedish MP a couple of days ago, our experience in Britain is it's much better if you don't cover things over. In the long run, it's going to be a lot easier for you to face up to the challenges rather than to try to laugh them away and kick them under the carpet for another few months.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that member of parliament didn't take it very well, but it's great advice. Douglas, of course, at least in part, what you've described here is, it seems, fueling a real antipathy on the part of a great many people in Europe for those who are in the sweeping it under the carpet mode or suppressing of free speech or other evidence of a serious problem. Give us just a quick flavor of how the possibilities of a Trump-like response might manifest itself in Europe in the days ahead.
Well, consider this. The response in Europe and much America to Donald Trump's proposed temporary ban on people from 7 unstable majority nations coming into the U.S. Consider the reaction to that. It was almost entirely fury, denunciations, this is Nazism, this is fascism, and so on. But consider that at around the same time, a think tank in London called Chatham House, very establishment, carried out a poll of 10,000 people in 10 European countries. And this poll asked whether they agreed with the statement that there should be no more Muslim immigration into their countries. And of the populations in the 10 European countries, including the majority in 8 of those countries, the majority of the public said that they didn't want any more Muslim immigration into their countries. And of the only 2 countries in which the sentiment was minority opinion, one of them was Britain. And in Britain, only 47% of the public said that they didn't want any more Muslim immigration into their country. And when you consider the divide between the acceptable opinion and indeed the mainstream opinion in the public sphere, in the press, in almost all political discourse, and then reflect on what now is majority opinion in most countries in Europe, you see, I think, a very startling divide. And it's one that has been growing and growing because, as Daniel Pipes pointed out a couple of years ago, we've been in this phenomenon where, whilst the public are running to the right, the politicians, in consequence, stampede towards the left. And this divide is being filled up in Europe by some politicians. But it's a very patchy picture, and it's certainly not a coherent one at present. We're facing the elections in the coming months in Holland in March. We've got the first round of the French presidential elections in April, and then later in the year after summer, elections in Germany. In Holland, it's unlikely, I would say, that Geert Wilders can form a coalition because although he may come out as the highest-ranking party, it's going to be very hard for him unless a new party called the Forum for Democracy breaks through and gets some seats. It's very hard for him to find anyone who will go into coalition government, which you need in Holland. In France, it's anyone's guess. There is a very narrow path to the presidency that Marine Le Pen could manage, but I think it's far more likely that having made it through to the second round, we see a repeat of what happened in 2002 with her father, and left and right in France joined forces to keep the National Front leader out of power. But, these are very strange times, and most of us, didn't expect the Brexit vote. Most of us didn't expect the Trump presidency. So I think that there is an enormous amount of political fluidity at the moment, but nowhere, I think, in the developed world is that as capable of flux as Europe is now, as I said, because of this huge divide that's been growing between the public and their representatives.
Yeah, over perfectly legitimate concerns in many cases about physical security and the transformation of their societies. There are few people who are monitoring this with greater skill or warning of it with better clarity than you. Douglas Murray of the Henry Jackson Society, I appreciate so much your time as well as your extraordinary contributions. I hope you'll keep them up and continue making them here with us in the days ahead. It's great to talk with you. Next up, we'll speak with Harold Rode, an American scholar and practitioner of national security policy, about the Middle East and what it all means for you. That more straight ahead.
Go to securefreedomradio.org today. It's your freedom. It's your country. Frank Gaffney's Secure Freedom Radio.